Hi, my name is Jeffrey Smith, and I research the dangers of genetically engineered foods. And one of the aspects of genetically engineered foods is that they are Roundup ready. Most of the GMOs, genetically modified organisms, are Roundup ready, meaning they're designed to be sprayed with Roundup herbicide. So when we look at the dangers of GMOs, we look at the dangers of Roundup because the plants drink the Roundup and deposit a portion of it in the food which we eat and have a gift for us. And we're here with Stephanie Seneff, who's going to tell us about some of the gifts that Roundup gives us, in particular, its active ingredient called glyphosate. Now, Roundup was originally patented as an herbicide by the company called Monsanto, and they own most of the patents for GMOs as well. And having studied Monsanto for a number of years, I can say that in their quieter, more reflective moments, they asked themselves, what would Darth Vader do? Because what they've come up with is a way of pretending that they're beneficial and then insinuating themselves into the food industry, the agriculture industry, and now it turns out that what they have is very, very dangerous. And among those very dangerous things is glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. And it was the subject of a very comprehensive evaluation, an article co-written by Dr. Seneff, and it's called Glyphosate. This is going to be more science than you're ready for, the name here. Glyphosate suppression of cytochrome P450 enzymes and amino acid biosynthesis by the gut microbiome, pathways to modern disease. Now, I looked at this paper and it all reads like that. Very, very difficult to understand. But what jumped out at me in the abstract, I'm going to read it to you. The consequences of glyphosate and all the things that it can go wrong are most of the diseases and conditions associated with a Western diet, which include gastrointestinal problems, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, depression, autism, infertility, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. We're also going to talk about anorexia and aggression and other things. So, Dr. Seneff, tell me, what is the central thesis of how this Darth Vader chemical can cause so many problems in our health?
I think the key thing is that it causes both nutritional deficiencies and toxins in your system. And it does both of these in part, maybe in large part, through the gut bacteria. Monsanto has always claimed that glyphosate is quite harmless to humans, like aspirin, and we shouldn't worry about it at all. And the reason is because it interferes with the shikimate pathway, which doesn't exist in our genes. So our cells, they don't have shikimate, no problem.
So in other words, the way that it functions by killing plants, there's a specific, you call the shikimate pathway. So pathway is not a path you walk on, it's a metabolic pathway. It means this causes this, causes this, causes this. But there's a roadblock at the beginning by glyphosate that says you can't do any of that. And that's what disrupts plants, etc.
And that's what kills them.
That's what kills them.
Yes.
So the idea then is that because humans don't have that metabolic pathway, then glyphosate can't get in the way of it.
Right, so it's harmless.
Right, so it's harmless. This was the basic premise.
Right. Now, here's a huge flaw with that premise. We have gut bacteria. Our bacteria outnumber our own cells 10 to 1. For every cell we have 10 bacteria, microbes of various sorts. And all of them have the shikimate pathway. So they're going to respond to glyphosate with extreme disruption of their livelihood. And in particular, glyphosate disrupts preferentially the beneficial bacteria. And so it allows the pathogens to overgrow. And then once you've got the pathogens, you've got all the toxins that they produce, and then you get inflammation, which wrecks the gut lining, you get leaky gut, and then these toxins get out into the bloodstream, they can go to the brain. I mean, your body is then responding to a very serious crisis at that point.
So here, I mean, I've been to a lot of medical conferences, and they're constantly talking about gut bacteria and leaky gut and gastrointestinal disorders as the basis of inflammation, autoimmune disease, a whole host of the Western. Right. So you're basically, if that's the key for a lot of medical practitioners, and glyphosate is sort of like the initiator of all that stuff,
right.
It's really like a missing link. Why don't you talk about, we're going to go through each of the diseases that are listed and some that we haven't yet talked about, and show how glyphosate is linked to it. When I say glyphosate, by the way, you can think Roundup, you can think of the same herbicides that you spray on your lawn and let your kids play on and your dogs roll on, and you hug your dogs and you lick your hands, and I just remember glyphosate, Roundup, okay? So tell me, how did you get into this topic?
Yeah, very interesting. I've been extremely concerned about autism for quite some time, actually for 30 years. I had a best friend 30 years ago whose son was diagnosed with autism, and I saw firsthand what that's like. And I've watched the rate of autism skyrocket. In the last 5 years, it's extremely scary. 1 in 150, 1 in 100, 1 in 88, and the most recent numbers in March of 2013, 1 in 50. In a telephone poll, 1 in 50 families, parents are admitting this is the rate of in the new generation. You do the math, 5 years, 1 in 50 today. 20 years from now, every other boy in this country will be diagnosed on the autism spectrum. I think that is a really scary idea. So I decided several years ago I needed to look at autism. I just needed to try to understand. And it's clear that most of the research is involved in genetics. And they're finding this gene, this other gene, all tiny, tiny contributions. And for some reason that I do not understand, the research into the environmental factors is practically nil. And it has to be an environmental issue. With the rate at which it's growing, it has to be environmental. Now, one of the things that's really increased in our environment in the last 5 years is glyphosate. And this is because of the GMO crops, directly your thing. And they claimed that with GMOs, glyphosate usage would go down, and in fact, it has clearly gone up. And we have the numbers in our paper that show a twofold increase in the use of glyphosate over a 5-year period in the 2000s. So it's because the GMOs are causing the weeds to be resistant to glyphosate, they're having to use more and more.
So let me explain that. So you spray the herbicide over the field, and at some point the weeds outsmart Monsanto, and they say, nah, you can't get me. So the farmers then put more glyphosate or Roundup, and the overall increase in herbicides as a result of these herbicide-tolerant crops is about 527 million pounds over the first 16 years. So glyphosate, this is not an abstract thing. It's found in the Midwest, where they spray it a lot, in 60 to 100% of the air samples, the rain samples, the surface water samples. It's found in the blood of pregnant women, in the unborn fetuses. It's found in the blood, in the urine of city dwellers in Germany. It's basically omnipresent. It's sort of Monsanto's omnipresence. Yes. So it's everywhere. It's in us, and it operates in very, very small quantities. But I'm jumping ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, and that's right. And in fact, the U.S. consumes 25% of the glyphosate that's sold. So we are huge. We are the biggest users of glyphosate in this country. So you can expect that we would have, if it's correlated with autism, we do have, in fact, high autism rates as well, and that fits. So I had come to a point by last September at which I had identified 2 key problems with autism that were not in the brain, but they were clear associated problems. One was the gut dysbiosis. It's very clear that autistic kids often have lots of issues with their digestive system.
Dysbiosis, what does that mean?
The gut bacteria are not properly balanced, and there's like inflammation, and there's leaky gut. And
technical term messed up.
Okay, yeah, and they have trouble eating lots of different things. They end up with gluten intolerance. Lots of the autistic kids are on gluten-free diet. You can see they've got problems in the gut. Number one. And number 2 is sulfur. There's
sulfur.
Yeah, there's a clear problem with sulfur metabolites. Now, it turns out sulfur is incredibly important to the body, and there's very little talked about it. Actually, even in nutrition books, it's hardly mentioned. It doesn't have a minimum daily requirement. It's considered to be plentiful, and therefore we should never worry about a deficiency. And I believe this is a key problem in our nutritional space, that we have become blind to sulfur. And I think that, in fact, sulfur deficiency, and more specifically sulfate deficiency, and I'll get to that in a moment, is a key factor in all the modern problems that we're having. And it's something that is not on anybody's radar screen. So
first of all, the gut bacteria is involved with both the immune system and the digestive system. So when it's messed up, it can create a whole series of problems. That was off. Sulfate transport,
transport and synthesis.
And both. Synthesis of sulfur was off, sulfate in the autistic kids. That was, they were showing up in literature.
They have they have like 1/3 of the normal level of sulfate in their blood, for example.
And no one has put it together as to why that's.
It's just there's people who've written. In fact, I have a lovely quote in the paper from Rosemary Waring, who's written extensively on this. So she must be very frustrated because she's been saying this since the paper was from like the early 1990s, and I quote it from her. She says there's got to be something wrong with sulfate and sulfur metabolism in these kids, because that's what she was seeing. And all the sulfur metabolites, things like cysteine, homocysteine, methionine, which is really, really important, and then glutathione. All these things are sulfur-based, very, very important sulfur-based molecules in biology that are derailed, that are improper balance in autism.
So all of this was laid out there. You found, I understand, you figured out why the brains of the autistic kids were functioning differently.
Yes.
You figured out that the gut bacteria was involved, that the
Yes.
sulfur was involved,
That's
but
right.
the missing link was, why are they having impairment
Yes.
of the sulfur and the gut bacteria?
That's exactly right.
And then glyphosate came in and said, bing.
It answered all the questions.
All right.
And that was when I thought it's got to be the glyphosate, you know? And I really do strongly believe that at
So
this point.
let's start then. We have a lot of diseases to cover, and there's people suffering from a lot of diseases saying, talked about my disease. No, just a moment. We're going to start with autism because that's where you started. Okay, describe to me what it is more specifically that glyphosate does inside our bodies that might predispose someone to have autism, or in the mother's body, if that's part of the issue.
It is part of the issue, yes, both the mother and the child and the fetus during development. So where do I start? Because it's, of course, a complicated story. There's these two things, the gut bacteria. So the gut bacteria have the shikimate pathway. The shikimate pathway produces aromatic amino acids, and these are essential amino acids. We actually get them from our diet or from our gut bacteria.
So there's a bunch of amino acids that we have to get from outside. They're called essential. Now, is aromatic a subset of those?
Yes.
All right.
And we can't make them. Our chemistry doesn't allow us to make them. So if we don't get them from our diet, we're basically...
Aromatic like aroma.
Yeah, that's like aroma, but I don't know why they're called that. They do have circular carbon chains, which is interesting. Okay, that's important. Actually,
all right.
that they have
All right.
that.
I was going to say,
and that's what
doesn't
makes
help.
them called aromatic.
All right, okay.
And these circular chains actually will come up later, because
Okay.
what happens then is that the gut bacteria being hit with glyphosate, they can't make these amino acids because of this shikimate pathway getting disrupted. And instead, they make other stuff because the pathway gets deflected into these other things. And the other things that they make are not good. There's, for example, P-cresol, which is made by C. difficile. C. difficile is a runaway pathogen that's been causing lots and lots of trouble in hospitals lately.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that,
Clostridium
yeah.
difficile.
Yeah.
And it produces this thing called P-cresol, which is a toxic phenol. And so there's a lot of talk about toxic phenols being produced by the gut bacteria, and those things are toxic. They can disrupt your DNA. They can cause problems with your fats in your cell membranes. I mean, they basically are kind of a wrecking ball.
So we have a wrecking balls being produced in our own gut bacteria
Right.
because the shikimate pathway is no longer being able to function, so it's producing
It's going
these,
to there instead.
it's
It's
saying,
like a
okay, we're going to
bypass.
produce these really horrible things.
Right. So
And-
that's one of them,
okay,
yeah.
all right.
And then there's a certain bacteria that can break down glyphosate, which is terrific. They can get rid of it. It's a really super deal. However, what they make is ammonia.
Oh, great.
and
Higher than the general population?
Yes,
Is it much higher?
Yes, well, I think so. And also in Alzheimer's. So both of them have,
Oh, so Alzheimer's and autistic kids have high levels of ammonia in the blood.
yeah.
And we know that ammonia causes, what is it in the brain?
Encephalopathy, yeah.
Encephalopathy.
Encephalitis.
Yes,
It
that's
actually
the word.
causes a very interesting, which I've written a paper about this actually, a very interesting reaction in the brain that can include in a severe case. You can have like a high fever. You can get seizures. You can get coma. But I think in the case of autism, there's a low grade version of this problem going on chronically.
Okay, so the troops that get dispatched by some genius inside who's maybe a problem, because now when they get dispatched, they create ammonia. Ammonia gets in the blood. Does it get in the blood automatically, or does it require a leaking
Ammonia
gas?
is a gas, but it travels very easily.
Oh, okay.
That's part
so
of the problem.
It doesn't need a leaky gut; it just goes through.
And there's a huge gut-brain connection. The gut and the brain are really in very good communication with each other. And in fact, I think the gut bacteria are sort of our window on the world, and they're kind of helping us out. They're seeing the food that comes in, all the toxins that come in. They're processing it, and then they're sending out signals. And this is something that's becoming a very interesting topic of research lately. A lot of people are starting to look into this space of the role of the gut bacteria in influencing how our cells behave, because they send out signals that we respond to, and particularly in the brain. So it's really interesting how that happens. In the brain will sort of change its modus operandi on the basis of the information it's getting from the gut bacteria.
So if we're messing up the gut bacteria, we're messing up the brain.
That's right.
Directly through electrical impulses and information exchange, but now also through gas exchange
Yes.
and chemical exchange, which
That's
gets in the
right.
blood through ammonia, and that can cause encephalopathy in the brain, which can restructure the way the brain functions, causing disabilities. Am I right tracking?
Terrific.
Okay,
Terrific.
so now tell me about formaldehyde, because you just said two things at once. I mean, I know that if you look at a bottle of ammonia, it doesn't say use as a gargle and mouthwash. Same thing with formaldehyde. It's like keep away. You know, it's like tiny amounts of formaldehyde in FEMA vans caused all sorts of uproar and people getting sick. So formaldehyde is extremely toxic. Am I right?
Yes.
So
yes.
and now we have a formaldehyde factory inside of us.
Yes.
So
and as you well, they're finding formaldehyde in the corn too.
I know. I saw 200 parts per million in one
yeah,
small
which is really
little
high.
study. I mean, it's very high. I want to try and get more research going, and that's in Roundup Ready corn, folks. The corn that we eat, formaldehyde at levels that are 100, 200 times more than considered dangerous. So we're having formaldehyde. What would that do in our bodies?
That'll wreck the DNA.
We need DNA.
Yeah, it can cause.
I hate when that happens.
Can cause cancer, for example.
So cancer. So formaldehyde's linked to cancer.
Yeah.
All right. So getting back, sticking with autism for a minute, have we covered? You talked about the disabling of the sulfur, the sulfate transport, and the sulfur synthesis. You talked about creating encephalopathy in the brain. We talked about the gut issue, and that's causing informational changes in the way that the brain develops. Is that it? Is that all that we have now, by the way, which is quite a bit? Is that the link? So we can stop talking about autism, or is there any more related to autism?
Well, these things are all related to all of the diseases. So they're all sort of the same story. And I haven't mentioned yet the cytochrome P450 enzymes, I think.
Right. Is that related to autism also?
Yes, that's directly related to sulfur problems, for example.
So we talked about the fact that glyphosate knocks off the shikimic pathway. And now what else are you going to tell me?
Yeah, so it does this by disrupting that pathway, and then it also interferes with these CYP enzymes through a totally different mechanism. It gets into the cells, and in particular in the liver. The liver has tons of these enzymes. One of the things these enzymes do is detoxify toxins. So it disrupts the enzymes that detoxify the other toxins that we're exposed to, which is really that's meta, you know? That
is. So in other words, there's this whole troop of people, of enzymes that go around and say, okay, clear it out. You've had stuff with this disease, or this chemical or that chemical. You have these overgrowth of bacteria. So it all goes into the primary detoxifier, the liver.
Yes.
And then the whole troops that are out there cleaning up, they become disabled. How bad? I mean, this cytochrome
P450. So you can call it CYP.
CYP.
Yeah.
So CYP is really important to make these troops do the detoxification.
That's right.
And so. How does it, so you're saying the glyphosate not only blocks the shikimic pathway, but another pathway altogether?
Yeah, it interferes actually with the actual molecule, all the different molecules that are CYP enzymes, and these enzymes are really interesting. They have huge roles in the body. For example, they activate vitamin D. Mm-hmm. They have a lot to do with cholesterol homeostasis. And so I think that a lot of the problems people are having with cholesterol could date back to, could be tied to this. And making the bile acids that will digest the fats.
So if it doesn't digest the fats, is that obesity?
Yeah, well, that's certainly part of that problem.
Okay,
yeah,
right.
And then the sex hormones, the stuff that's involved with the sex hormones. Aromatase is an enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen, and one of the things that's associated with autism is aromatase deficiency, and glyphosate has been shown specifically to block aromatase. I mean, so that's a specific example. Some of the other ones I'm generalizing from the evidence because there's several papers that talk about glyphosate disrupting various enzymes, and so you can infer that it would, and the mechanism that it uses is general to all of them.
Okay.
So you can infer that wherever it gets close to one of them, it's going to cause problems. And there's tons of them in the liver, and the glyphosate goes straight to the liver through the hepatic portal vein. So you kind of put 2 and 2 together and get 5 with that.
All right. So what I'm hearing is we just opened up an entire can of worms with the CYP. Or is it CYP?
CYP. Yeah, you
CYP.
can call it however you like.
Yeah. So the CYP, what I was told is, glyphosate, everyone knows it blocks the shikimic pathway. But I was told a while ago that it also blocks this cytochrome P450, the CYP, and that may be even worse.
Yes. I think it is.
And no one is paying attention to
that. I'm not sure which one's worse.
Yeah,
but
like, how do you want to die? So talk to me. So this can affect obesity, detoxification, autism. You mentioned some others.
Reproductive infertility.
Disorders. Okay, infertility.
And cholesterol homeostasis and vitamin D. Now, so vitamin D deficiency has suddenly appeared on the horizon. They're like, oh my God, half the country has vitamin D. This is a real epidemic going on right now. with vitamin D deficiency. And you have to wonder whether that's also coinciding with this increased exposure. Because it's not just that more glyphosate is being used, it's that more of it's being soaked up because we have all these GMOs that are happy to just soak it up and they don't die. So now they're spraying it on the field instead of, they used to have to sort of spray it first and then they had to actually deal with the weeds because they couldn't put the glyphosate on the plant, it would die. Now they don't. So now the plant just soaks it up and then we don't even know how much is in our food because...
And every time Monsanto approves a new Roundup Ready crop, they get the government to change the allowable residues.
I know, that's
so,
right.
you know, they had to go up like 5,000-fold in sugar beets when they had Roundup Ready sugar beets. And so there may be glyphosate in the sugar, but there's certainly glyphosate in the sugar beet pulp, which is used in animal feed, which we'll get to later. All right, so I want to finish up autism and then get on to these other diseases, but I think we already started to get onto these other diseases.
I know, but they're all tied. I mean, it's really kind of the same story over and over, so right. You'll see.
So pick a disease. I mean, are we done with...
Let me just do one more thing,
okay,
which is another effect that glyphosate has. So I think there's really at least 3 principal effects that it has. And the third one may be as important or more important than the other 2, I don't know. And this is a depletion of micronutrients. And it basically chelates +2, these are called +2 cations that are, really important minerals in our body. Calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, cobalt. Zinc and sulfur deficiency are associated with autism. And so that connects up as well, the zinc deficiency having to do with the glyphosate.